Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our audience from around the world, as well as our panelists. My name is Fred Walti. I'm the CEO of the Network for Global Innovation, and I would like to welcome you to another edition of the NGIN Global Roundtable series today with you. Today's subject is a great one. It's water resiliency, and I think we have a real treat today because our panelists represent a real diverse perspective on this subject. We have panelists geographically diverse from 4 different countries. We have panelists that will represent the public utilities, private professional services groups, NGOs, and of course, a world-renowned environment organization. We will talk about water resiliency from a developed country point of view, as well as the developing country. We will have organizations that are building large centralized systems, and we will have organizations that are building decentralized systems. We will talk about the technology and the challenges, as well as the environmental justice and who pays for things, and are they the same people that benefit from things. We have, water resiliency is I don't think it's a pretty complex subject. It's a large subject, but the goal is pretty simple. How do we deliver safe, affordable, accessible water to the world's population? And, we need to do a better job of it, because even though that's a very simple objective, getting there is very difficult. I think there's roughly 2 billion people today who do not have access, 24/7 access to clean, safe water in the world. And literally millions of people die each year from waterborne diseases of one kind or another. All of us on this call are involved in climate in one way or another, and climate change is making the challenges of delivering water incredibly more challenging, whether it's in the northern Italy that you'll hear about today, and the ravages of drought and flooding and back and forth there, or challenges of figuring out where water is coming from. If you're from Los Angeles, whether you're going to get it from 90% of it is imported. So the challenges of when that's coming along. It is a global problem, even though the symptoms look very different depending upon where you are. You'll see that it's very different in northern Italy than from India. We have panelists from the U.S., from Italy, from India, and from Australia. And those of you who are joining us from the United States, if you think that the U.S. is exempt from this problem, you would be mistaken, because all you have to do is think back a couple of years to Flint, Michigan, and a whole city was without water because of failure of infrastructure. And I read a pretty remarkable statistic the other day in preparation for this. Roughly 250,000 water leaks from water mains happen each year across the country, and we lose 1 trillion gallons of water. So it's a challenge no matter where you are in the world on this, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The format for this discussion is relatively simple. I will introduce our 5 panelists. I encourage the audience, by the way, if you're with us, to look at their bios on the registration link. I'm not going to go into detail on each of their bios. It would take the whole time to talk about the accomplishments of this group. We're going to have them talk about their region and their projects and perspective. And then at the end of this, we'll field questions from the audience or have a discussion among the panelists. At the end of all of this, we're going to try something different today. And we're going to have breakout sessions with some of our panelists, in which the audience members can have a more direct dialogue. You'll have breakout rooms, and we'll show you how to do that towards the end of the session. We will also forward all of the contact information for the people on the panelists. So that's how it's going to happen. I want to take 2 minutes and thank all the people that have made this happen. Our friends at Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the mayor's office, the city of LA, the Los Angeles Sanitation and Environment Department, all of the organizations of the panelists that have represented here today, and of course, the folks at Network for Global Innovation. Our job is to make this look simple, even though it may not be so simple to actually do. Okay, so with that, we're going to get started, and we're going to get started with the young lady who is closest physically here, Nancy Sutley. Nancy is the Deputy Mayor of the City of Los Angeles in charge of energy and the environment. Prior to that, Nancy was the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which I believe is probably the largest municipally owned utility in the U.S. Prior to that, she was the chair of the President's Council on Environmental Quality in the Obama administration. And Nancy and I have had the pleasure, or at least from my side, we've had the pleasure of working together for a number of years on making the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator a reality and building its home, the Los Angeles, the Lacretz Innovation Center, which I still think is probably one of the first innovation centers in which there's an incubator and a utility under the same roof. So with that, I will shut up and introduce Nancy. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Fred. It's always good to be with you, and enjoy the opportunity here to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is around water resilience. So as Fred mentioned, I'm Deputy Mayor of Energy and Sustainability for Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. I've been on this particular job for a little over 4 months, as the mayor's just passed her 6 months in office. But I've spent the prior almost 9 years at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power as the Chief Sustainability Officer, and have been working on water and water resilience issues in California for more than 20 years. It's really hard, I think, to overemphasize how important water is to Los Angeles as a city, its growth, its prosperity, its future, because we live in a semi-arid climate. If Los Angeles hadn't developed other sources of water, and we just relied on the precipitation we get every year, we would be a city of only about 400,000 people, and we're 10 times that large. So the ability to develop water resources, to manage water resources under various climatic conditions has really been key to the growth of Los Angeles as a city into the second largest city in the United States, in the most populated county in the most populated state in the United States. Water is so essential to LA. LA's founding. There's a number of stories I could tell, but the one I will tell is that when California became part of the United States after its time as part of Spain and then Mexico, the most property rights did not transfer over. So some of the original Spanish and Mexican settlers of Los Angeles lost, their property. But what did transfer over were the water rights that had been conferred on the small pueblo of Los Angeles by the King of Spain. That's how important water was to the city and continues to be. And the LADWP, the Department of Water and Power, has been providing high quality drinking water, reliable drinking water to Los Angeles for more than 100 years. But we face a lot of challenges due to the growth of the city, and challenges due to climate change. And that is in large part because we are primarily reliant on importing water from outside of Los Angeles, from hundreds of miles away in the eastern part of California, from Northern California, and from the Colorado River. And because of many factors, but not the least of which is a changing climate, all of those sources of water are stressed. Los Angeles used to get about 75% or 80% of its water from its own aqueduct coming out of the mountains north and east of Los Angeles. And over the last several decades, in large part to deal with the impact on the environment, that water source has been constrained. And our other big source of imported water is buying water from the region's water wholesaler, an agency called the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I sit on their board. Its sources of water are the Northern California and the Colorado River, and those sources are stressed as well. Managing sort of natural environments and managing water infrastructure in the middle of these natural environments has proven to be very challenging. So Los Angeles has really have to rethink how we manage water, how we obtain water, how we assure that our residents continue to have a safe, clean, and affordable source of water. So the city has been really looking and investing in projects that will help assure water for another 100 years, or hopefully another 100 years after that, to even in a changing climate. And the strategy is really around all of the opportunities to reduce our reliance on imported water and increase the use of water, locally generated water, just say, starting first and foremost with water conservation. And Los Angeles has been a leader in water conservation. We, in the last several decades, have really made investments in water conservation and in changing our building codes and our building practices to ensure water conservation comes first. And as a result of all the efforts of people in Los Angeles, we use less water today, significantly less water today than we did 30 years ago, even though our population has increased by more than 1 million people. And so water conservation will continue to need to be the kind of leading strategy, and now a lot focused on outdoor water use. Also looking at better using our groundwater resources. We in a typical year, we'll get between 10 and 15% of our water from groundwater. The challenge with groundwater, like many urban areas, is that there's a lot of a legacy of industrial pollution in the groundwater, and we have to clean that up before we can fully take advantage of what is actually a really good resource for Los Angeles, and a little bit climate-proofed resource for Los Angeles. Looking at capturing more rain when it does fall. Last year at this time, we were sort of lamenting the driest year on record, the third in a row of the driest years on record, 3 really dry years. Los Angeles has a cycle of wet winters and dry summers. And then this past winter was one of the wettest on record. So we're really dealing, as a result of climate change, with extremes of wet and dry. So we are trying to invest in projects at all scales that will help us capture more of the rain when it does fall and put it to good use. And then finally, looking at recycling wastewater. So the city of Los Angeles has a series of wastewater treatment plants to deal with all of our needs for the city. And the city operates the largest wastewater treatment in the west of Chicago, out near, just south of the LAX airport, if you've ever been to Los Angeles. So Los Angeles now has a plan to recycle 100% of its wastewater to help to provide a reliable supply of water into the future. So that plan is being worked on between the Los Angeles Bureau of Sanitation that owns the wastewater treatment facilities and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, who runs the water and drinking water system. So we really want to turn reuse all of our water and turn it back into drinking water. And so a number of projects are moving ahead when it comes to recycled water. And then the last piece I'll mention is that, as mentioned, we buy water from the water wholesaler, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and they as well are working on a regional recycled water project they're calling Pure Water Southern California, working with the County of Los Angeles, which is the most populous county in the US, in working on a plan to convert their largest wastewater treatment plant into a recycled water plant. There's been a lot of innovation around recycled water, particularly in the arid West in the US and in Southern California. And there's a number of questions that we have to answer as we develop these plans and make the investments to reuse 100% of our wastewater. And that's around sort of whether we'll go directly to potable reuse, waiting for some regulations coming out of the state of California, or whether we'll need to store that water in the ground and give it some time as part of the treatment. And that's why our groundwater basins then are even more important as storage. And then really addressing issues around affordability. We are trying to not only reuse our wastewater, but reuse a lot of infrastructure that was built to do somewhat different things. And so how much of that existing infrastructure will be able to use for recycled water, how much will we have to add, both in terms of treatment and moving that water around, and how do we manage all that water for the benefit of all Angelenos. So I will stop there. A lot will happen in the next few years as we move forward with these plans. Thank you.
So to put this in perspective, see if I've got this right, Nancy. Today, over 90% of LA's water comes imported of one kind or another, and just less than 5% are from wastewater treatment. And the objective of your program, I think it's called Operation Next, is to take that less than 5% to 30% of all over the next several decades.
Yeah, that's right. To reuse 100% of that treated wastewater, so that will constitute really a lot of our water supply. We really understand that these sources of imported water are really strained and stressed, and we will be better off not being so reliant on them. And so the overall goal is to reduce our reliance on these imported sources of water. It's water coming from far away to less than 50% of our total water supply. So recycled water will play a really key role in making sure that we can meet that goal.
And for those who are not familiar with LA's physical thing, this project is both a massive scale up of the ability to treat wastewater in a plant, Hyperion, as well as the ability to take that water and get it geographically really spread out to the aquifers around LA.
Yeah, but I mean, when we're coming, the way the infrastructure was built, and I think this is true for a lot of cities, it was to try to get the wastewater away from the city as quickly as possible. And a coastal city like Los Angeles, that meant treating it and putting it in the ocean. So we have to move it back to where the people are. So among the challenges and the engineering challenges of completing this plan are really about just really reconfiguring kind of a system built to do something else.
And just one more thing on perspective and context. This project is going to take several decades. Is that the plan? That means it's a very large project.
It is a very large project. It is a very large undertaking. It'll take several decades, and it will cost many billions of dollars to complete. But really thinking about how to make best use of the existing infrastructure, how to kind of integrate other agencies' plans, and how to do this in a way that is both affordable, but provides the same level of quality and reliability that we can currently provide. Will all take some time. So trying to and a little bit of building the plane while we're flying the plane. So
terrific. Okay, well, look, thank you. We'll come back to you in a couple of minutes. We're gonna get on a plane and fly east to northern Italy now, to Enrico Pochettino. Enrico is head of innovation from what I think he describes in Europe as a multi-utility. I love that description, which means water, energy, waste, heat, in from a company called IREN Group. And Enrico, I look forward to hearing from you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Yes, multi-utility is an English name that we use in Italy to describe this kind of companies. We are listed in the stock exchange, so quite, let me say, big company, 10,000 employees, about last year something like 7 billion euro of turnover, but also the energy part is quite important. And multi-utility means managing several businesses. One of these is the water business, so we can go through that later on. But before going to the water business, let me say that managing several different businesses that in the past were managed like a silos, very separate. Also, we came with this portfolio after acquisition and several operation. We were born at the beginning of last century, so 120 years of history. Having this different sector is helping us right now to manage also the water problem, all the energy transition and the circular economy transition in the good way, because we can merge together, put on the project the right components. We produce biogas from waste, but we produce biogas also from sludge, from water business. The expertise on managing methane, biomethane, but methane as energy vector comes from the thermoelectric sector of the distribution of gas, and also a lot of chemistry, physical, thermodynamic components can come together to try to solve problem. Just talking about the water business. We are the third operator in Italy. We operate mainly in the northwest part of Italy. So, cities like Turin, Genoa, Parma, Reggio Emilia. Maybe you know more Parma and Reggio Emilia because of Parmigiano Reggiano and prosciutto di Parma, maybe, but in any case, we manage the water system in about 240 municipalities, about 3 million inhabitants, in a very, very different situation. Quite big town. For us, it's almost a big town. It's not like LA, but Turin, 1 million inhabitants plus another million surrounding. or small towns like I don't know, Portofino, maybe you know, Cinque Terre, small towns in which a wastewater plant is very difficult to build and have to be say landscape compliant. No, okay, so only membrane underground, because we cannot have an impact on the landscape. What's the problem now? It's a problem of Italy, but the north of Italy is becoming more complicated. We have a dry season, as LA was saying. You experience in LA. The north of Italy lasted for 1 year and a half. A very, very dry situation. Was the driest since we started to the measurement of rainfall, for example, that started at the beginning of the 19th century. So in 200 years, more or less, the driest one. That is inside that trend. No, over the last 30 years, we had a 20% of reduction of water availability. We had an increase also in terms of how do you say, the water stress index. For example, we reached the 30% compared to a 20% of target. And also how much water we use every year compared to the total water availability, no? Okay, but in the last year and a half, we had this big problem. Just joking by brackets. I was in Berlin something like 2 months ago, talking about this drought problem, and when I was there, we had one of the biggest flooding situation we had ever in the north of Italy, with 16 people died, almost 30,000 people displaced, no, and €1 billion of damages. No, really very big area. What is peculiar, no, is that we are close to this region, no, very close, or also in this region, still in a dry situation, because we couldn't kept this water. This water just destroyed everything, but the water is not more available because this region is very close to the sea. We wasted all this water, no? Okay, so under our point of view, what we are doing, we are trying to do to face with this climate change, because it's clear that it's something related to a climate change situation. We are rethinking on creating basins to keep the water. Now, this flood can be with basin reduced in terms of impact on the lands, but at the same time you can storage water for usage. We are planning to increase the usage of water. Right now in Italy, only 5% of the water is reused. We have 2 plants with reuse of water. With the percentage is a little bit higher than 5%, but is almost something that wasn't a normal situation reusing water, because the north of Italy really is famous for skiing, you know, for mountain, Monte Bianco, I don't know, is really a place with always a lot of amount of water, lakes, no, okay. Now we are investing in that, and talking specific on the reuse of water, also the legislation is changing under the European Union. Just 2 days ago, we had a new legislation about the quality level of reused water. It's very important to know for us which kind of quality we have to deliver. And this directive is for agriculture and industrial use of water. No, it's not yet possible to use the reusing water for a potabilization process for drinking. No, but at least agriculture, industrial, knowing, for example, that is no more needed to have a very high purification system if you have to go to agriculture, because you take out the nutrients that are useful for agriculture. So now we have a legislation that let us to not to treat too much the water if it's not needed. Okay, the big point is the infrastructure after the treatment plant. Now, because one thing is to have reused water at the plant, another thing is to deliver that water, and also a business model problem. Now, who is paying for the infrastructure to deliver the water? Consider that if in the agriculture, a farmer have as they have right now the possibility to take water underground with a private well, okay, why he should pay, let me say, a lot for reused water? No, okay, there is a problem of mandatory rules, I don't know, something that have to be designed, no? And it's not correct also to ask a citizen, urban citizen, to pay for an infrastructure maybe that use from industry and agriculture. No? So this is a big problem. We have, I think, a good legislation for urban use of water, aqueduct based on regulated asset base, remuneration on investment, tariff, national authority. Everything is clear, but this part after the wastewater treatment for reuse of water is still something that we have to design, I would say. Okay. I don't know, Fred.
I have a question. Maybe this is for you and Nancy, maybe Charmy. Where are we in terms of regulations on the quality of water relative to wastewater treatment? I'm unclear as to whether we have them. We're going to get them. So can you give me some help in that?
Well, at least in California, so the regulations for using recycled water for non-potable uses like landscape irrigation, non-food irrigation. So, and then we separated using different infrastructure. So purple pipe infrastructure. So that's been in use now in California for, probably 30 years. What's more recent is to try to, and it's been used for other things like seawater barrier, intrusion barriers, and for industrial use and things like that, but in a separate network. And so what the regulations are developing now, there's already a number of projects in California and in other parts of the US, which you call indirect potable reuse, where you can highly treat the water and then put it in the ground for additional time, for additional treatment. So that's what a number of places are doing, including in Orange County, California. And then what everybody is waiting for is regulations on what's called direct potable reuse, where you can go directly back into the drinking water system with adequate treatment. So we're waiting for those standards. So what that would eliminate is the need for separate infrastructure for recycled water that really could just come back into the drinking water system. That's what's going on, at least in California.
Enrico, are your plans for the future as aggressive in the treating of wastewater as LA? I mean, Nancy said somewhere from 5 to 30%, something like that. Are you guys, is that part of your strategy or not?
Yes, maybe the situation is less demanding, let me say, talking about north of Italy. The south is hotter weather, so maybe could be different. It's less demanding, but it's always a matter of from which situation you start and where do you have to arrive. No, okay. So right now, for example, one project that we are designing is quite peculiar because we are as the problem of drought is mainly in the flat is called Pianura Padana, so it's the big region below the Alps. Okay, we have the management also in a region that is Liguria is on the other side of the Alps, from the sea and the Alps. We are planning to build a desalination plant and using, for example, an old oil pipe that used to bring oil from a Genoa port crossing the Alps, using it to bring desalinated water, for example. Okay, but are big infrastructure that have to be public financed, let me say. And as for reuse of water, we have many projects, and now we are trying to solve with private contract with the industry and some consortium of farmer to solve the problem of the price, the tariff, because we need a long-term offtake of this water in order to let the investment that at the end is a private investment, because in Italy right now is not paid by the tariff, as I was saying before.
Interesting. Okay, well, thank you. We'll come back to you. And we're getting on an airplane and we're flying east again, and we're going to land in Delhi. And we're going to say hello to Ravi Sewak, who's from the Safe Water Network. And Ravi is very accomplished. His organization has done a great deal of work in India. NGIN has worked in India for a number of years. We know how challenging that can be. And Ravi is the country director for India for the Safe Water Network, and he is the global lead for all their technical services. They've done some really terrific things, but now we're going to shift from decentralized systems to from centralized systems to more decentralized challenges. Ravi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fred, to you, all the fellow panelists, and NGIN for inviting us. Safe Water Network is an NGO started by Paul Newman some 2 decades early. In India, we are here for last 15 years. Let me first paint the picture of India, which will also talk about most of the developing world. Till 5 years before, almost 1 billion people out of 1.4 did not have pipe water access. So India embarked upon world's largest pipe water program of $90 billion to connect each rural and urban home. And within the last 5 years, it has moved the needle dramatically to reach pipe water to almost 70% of its populace. More in urban, and still in rural, it's something like 58%. So suddenly, from nowhere, the pipe water have come in. But you must recognize that India, like all the developing world, majority of the population is poor. They live below $2 a day, and hence they cannot afford expensive utilities. And hence, most of the water which goes to the rural populace, as well as to the poorer households in the urban homes, do not pay for their water. And that makes it even more challenging for the utilities to be able to recoup the operating cost and be able to maintain the infrastructure. Climate change has made life more difficult because rains, which were typically a 90-day cycle, have become lesser and more steeper. So water storage is another big problem. And it impacts not only workdays, 73 million workdays are lost, but also there are many other challenges of waterborne diseases and lives, especially that of children, were lost. So where do we figure? We bring in the last mile expertise in decentralized water solutions or water systems. So what we experimented with is typically three types of model. One is water ATM model, safe water station model, where you take out a groundwater, measure its quality, and see what are the elements that are making health a challenge for the community, purify that, and give it to them at very affordable rate of 7 cents for 20 liters of water, fee gal of water at 7 cents. So that is called a water ATM model. And across India and Ghana, Safe Water Network has 500 communities where we serve almost 2 million people the affordable, safe water after purification. The second model among this only is micro water grids, which is in Ghana. Mostly about 100 communities are there where we extract or take out the local water and purify that and redistribute it through a small prepaid water meter system to each home. And they can also come in and pick up water at these locations. But both these solutions are decentralized. Now we have recently innovated into a third option where we do the community-based augmented chlorination and automatic monitoring system. What happens is, with each and every community having piped water, which is not 24/7, it is prone to getting recontaminated. And how do you remove the recontamination risks is by adding pure chlorine at a very, very low rate so that the microbial contamination goes away and waterborne diseases are not there. So you have to boost the automatic chlorination through each point of entry of each community of 300 homes, 500 homes, or 1,000 homes. And typically the water supplies through an overhead water tank. So at the entry of the overhead water tank, we have innovated by having an automatic chlorinator and also IoT-based, cloud-based monitoring system, which gives us the water security and water service delivery measures on every 15-minute basis. So we have expertise of last mile in decentralized water systems, much unlike what Nancy or Enrico talked about, but we are working along with the community, making them competent, training them to operate their own systems and collect the money, whatever little it comes, so that they can service the infrastructure that is created. Because of this experience, we have also provided technical assistance for 4 years to the largest group of water treatment plants set up by one state in India, which were 18,500 plants that were set up. So our team sat in the government offices to do the tendering, provide contracting, provide the SLAs, and subcontract the work to almost 100 subcontractors to manage this large infrastructure of plants. So this is the type of work that we do, and our aim is to reach this water to the missing middle where nobody is able to easily reach through these decentralized systems, either directly or, since money is too much, we provide technical assistance and we go further by partnering with others. So this is our basic model, Fred.
So let's make sure I understand. An ATM, okay, in your world is a single station where people come to and pick up water and pay 7 cents for a number of liters.
Correct.
The microgrid is the same idea in terms of getting the water out of the ground, but there's a distribution system to the immediate community, and they prepay to use that as well. Is that correct?
And it is also coupled by people coming in and collecting. If they don't have money enough to prepay or something, they can pay as you go and collect it from the safe water station. So this is a dual option, the second one.
And in these systems, do you work with or aside the local governments?
Oh, 100%. Because the local laws have given the responsibility for drinking water to the elected village body, both in India and Ghana, and they have to give us the license to operate. And they have to partner. And we, being an NGO, cannot employ thousands of people. So we engage with the local self-help groups, women self-help groups, or village communities, or local entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and enable them, train them, coach them, install the entire system, and from scratch, make them operate it while we continue to oversight and control and supervise the water quality, monitoring, price compliance, inclusion of each and every community so that everybody gets water. And those parameters are also supervised by us. But local participation is must.
You know, I was struck by when we were talking earlier, Ravi. You know, my organization, the Network for Global Innovation, okay, and your organization has a network of, I believe, stakeholders. And is that your primary method, if you will, to influence policy? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Oh, most certainly. We have built a Safe Water Enterprise Alliance consisting of about 50 participants, first in India, followed by in Ghana, and also in New York for other North American participants. And we were lucky to be invited by the Government of India to author for them both rural water access program for 800 million people and tap in each home. That was $50 billion program, which is running from 2019 to 2024. And we also authored for the government, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, the Amrut 2.0 program, which is a $40 billion program to reach pipe water to 100 million people and make cities water secure, water sustainable, etc., where we do the city water balance plans, etc. So we were lucky to participate in the policy making framework, and that was only possible because we are a network of people who work along with us and be able to provide the inputs, including to the national water standards, which is Bureau of Indian Standards, where we author a lot of standards along with the Bureau.
Great. Well, Ravi, thank you. I'll come back to you in a couple minutes. We're getting on our plane and we're flying further east to Australia, except for Rod is not in Australia today. He is in, I believe, Texas. Rod Naylor, who is the global water lead for a professional services company by the name of GHD, very large company. And Rod has over 30 years experience in the world of water, and he has some really unique perspective and case histories. And I think you're going to start off by talking a little bit about what we're all has been in each one of our conversations: money. Anyways, welcome, Rod.
That's right. Thank you very much, Fred. It's great sitting with the panelists and hearing so many parallels with my experience and the things I'd love to talk about. But in 10 minutes, I'm going to try and cover a little bit of work we did around the money, around the economic impact, and potentially reframing the question not from who pays, but who pays if we don't do it? What are the implications? And then I'd like to tell a bit of a story about the history of the last 20 years of Sydney, and I'm hearing strong parallels from northern Italy and from Los Angeles about droughts and then flooding rains. Just to provide a little more explanation, I guess GHD as a company was founded in Australia over 90 years ago, fast approaching 100 as a water consultancy. It's branched out now to 12,000 people worldwide and focused on water, energy and communities, making them sustainable for generations to come. But as I keep upsetting my colleagues, none of that's possible without getting the water bit right first. So I think water's part of energy, water's part of community, water's part of our resilience. So I wanted to cover quickly, I guess, the work that we did, we called Aquanomics, and was a piece of work looking at the economics of water risk and future resilience. work we did with Cambridge Econometrics and Man's Bites Dog in the UK. I looked at 10 countries, but I'll focus a little bit on Australia and the US here because that's where I'm from and that's where I'm sitting, I guess. We took a look based on a 2 degrees temperature change at the years 2022 to 2050 at the economic implication of water risk manifest through climate change. So droughts, floods, and storms. And I don't need to convince this audience that, if climate change is a shark, then water is its teeth, is the way a great article from Bloomberg this week put it. So we did that assessment, and across those areas, because using econometric modelling, we'll pop the link in the chat for the study if anyone actually wants to get into the detail about how it was done and the breadth of it. But what we found across the 10 countries, including UK, US, Canada, UAE, Australia, and the Philippines, was $5.6 trillion worth of economic loss and damage expected at 2 degrees from water-related events. Interesting take for me was storms hit 49% of that, floods 36%, and drought only 15%. But that's because we took a view not on the water industry itself, right across the economy. And the biggest impacts were in manufacturing, distribution, FMCG, and retail. What was interesting was things like agriculture depended very much on which country you're in, the climate risk and the agriculture. So that mix and the valuation varied dramatically across the different organisations, so the different countries. Some as little as 0.1% of GDP per year reduction, up to as much as 0.7% GDP per year. If you take that over 30 years, that's a huge economic impost in a country if we don't act to deal with these issues. For Australia, the total bill looked at about $300 billion damage. For the US, being more than 10 times bigger, it actually worked out at 3.7 trillion and 0.5% of annual GDP loss if we don't act properly to mitigate those damages. But listening to Nancy today, we're on the way to doing much better about it, which is a great outcome. So for me, that really set the challenge and the paradigm for what we need to do. Otherwise, we're going to get in trouble. But it also draws out that water is extremely local. We all know that. The solutions are not the same wherever we go. The solutions are different. They need to take into account local communities and circumstances, as well as the effects of drought or storms, the water cycle locally, and the local economics. So it really highlighted those differences. What we drew from it was 3 strategies to do something about it, and they're strategies that we're taking into account in Sydney, and I've heard repeated today, particularly I think in Northern Italy and in Los Angeles. The first is to take an adaptable approach to building resilience. The answer is not one mega project that'll fix it forever. We used to think that way, and looking out at the window here in Houston, there's a lot of concrete out there that's premised on that idea. But the idea of actually building an adaptive planning process with adaptive pathways and staging investment, primarily to do with the fact that we're not sure yet just how bad climate change is going to get. So how do we design a 100-year asset when we're not sure just how far we're going to go and how bad the implication is? We're better to develop adaptive pathways and develop and evolve as we go, and importantly, as we innovate and create new ways of managing and delivering water and sanitation services better. The second, to implement circular economy approaches and thinking. And it was great, Enrico, to hear the multi-utility translates to such great opportunities to integrate water, wastewater, energy, waste, to bring circularity, to bring a distributed asset philosophy into play, and to be able to do things not just on a grand scale, but also on a distributed local scale, which Ravi, you're doing in many ways in India. So that's a really strong play, but importantly, to go all the way with circular economy, to think about regenerative systems and leveraging and increasing our use of nature-based systems in that integration, instead of the massive concrete answer for forever. And the last really was to focus on using digital innovation capability and technology to drive innovation and improvement in how we manage better, whether that's managing the use and efficiency and performance of the assets that we already have, which was Nancy's problem, and also Enrico's problem in terms of distribution, but also to be able to react quicker and understand and predict better what those impacts might be, rather than waiting till it happened and then just have a disaster, and also to plan better in the long term based on that data and that information. So that was what we took away as the opportunities from Aquanomics. And as I said, the links there in the chat if you want to investigate.
My question to you, Rod, is did anybody believe it?
It was interesting. In general, yes. Fred, we took that work to COP27 last year in Egypt. We presented in the Water Pavilion and also in the Australian Pavilion. And a bit like being here today, the feeling in the global community, we're all definitely singing from that same hymn sheet. We had a few doubters, people who just couldn't believe the problem was that big a scale. But by and large, and particularly in the, I feel like the global water community, people said, yes, we understand that, we see the damage and the implication, and we're working towards solutions. So yeah, it was really well received. Thanks. Great. So what did that mean for Sydney? I wanted to just talk a little bit about Sydney, Australia in the other 5 minutes, or 4 minutes, I think, that I've got left. Sydney and Los Angeles, we share a lot of similarities. That was obvious listening to you, Nancy. We share the Pacific Ocean and the La Nina, El Nino cycle, which drives our droughts and our flooding rains. We share the Hemworths on occasion as well, backwards and forwards between Sydney and Los Angeles. There's a lot of parallels and similarities between the two locations. Sydney, back in 1996, started to experience what we called the Millennium Drought. We didn't realise in 1996, 97, 98, which was dry, exactly what that meant. But it went until 2010, and it was unprecedented. A word we hear a lot around climate change in terms of the long, dry spell. What we honestly did is we waited to see. We didn't have good prediction analytics. We didn't have as good an understanding of the projection of climate change probably 20 years ago. And then when we got to the crunch point, we invested billions in large projects at that time solely identified as increasing supply. We built 6 major desalination plants. We built a huge recycled water scheme with the intention of going to indirect potable reuse, but without taking into account community perceptions and and some of the other issues around the sort of bold assumption, if we build it, we'll use it, we've fixed it with a big piece of concrete and steel. We got through happily, and what happened was we actually moved directly into floods, which is a pretty common scenario. And what we found perversely, maybe it was a hint of the things to come, the desalination plant that we built in Brisbane, where we also had built the recycled water scheme that wasn't turned on at that time and wasn't used because we hadn't got it right, became our saviour during a flood when water quality issues from the flood meant our conventional water treatment plants couldn't keep up. And the desalination plant actually stepped in and now is standard practice for that part of Australia in situations of flood and poor water quality to maintain water supply and water security. So the start of a different way of thinking about different assets in adaptable and different roles in an integrated system for resilience, rather than the one fixes all. A few years in between, our population growing, we're developing Western Sydney dramatically, 800,000 people or 800,000 people's worth of livelihoods and homes being developed in Western Sydney. Sydney is geographically constrained to a basin. The only place there's room left is in the west. And Western Sydney has a whole bunch of equality issues around poor access to recreation, around urban heat island effect, economic opportunity. What's happened in the meantime is we've started to think very differently about how we plan the water resilience and services of Sydney around not just water supply, around providing equality and opportunity, around availability and access to green space, to swimmable rivers and to recreation, and around providing economic opportunity and business, as well as managing urban heat island effect through using water in the environment. So turned up to 2017 and 2020, we had another drought. In the intervening years, although we have, like Los Angeles, reduced our per capita consumption dramatically, we still have 800,000 more people in Sydney. And during that short drought, the trajectory of our reservoir, the reduction in level was severe, almost double the rate of the previous drought through climatic conditions, but also through population growth. Suddenly, where we had planning windows of 4, 5, 6 years, we realised that our planning window actually kicked in critical path at about 85% reservoir level. And this is a reservoir that only overtops about every 10 years. So the world had shifted and the thinking had to change. And I'm glad to report, I guess, that Sydney is actually adapting and responding with a diverse approach and with a more distributed strategy on a large scale. Sydney already has a desalination plant. Sydney has a large dam that provides us flood protection, but also is our primary source of water. And we have immediately after the 17 to 2000 flood, we had horrific bushfires, similar to those that have been experienced in California and in Canada again this year, which again created water quality issues, dramatic issues for water treatment, where the desalination plant became a resilient response because of water quality issues. We then went into 3 100-year floods in a year in Sydney, where the flood mitigation capacity of that dam is in debate. Should it be increased by lowering the level to protect us from floods, but that compromises our water security. Also on the table is water recycling. And we are currently building a large water recycling plant with an adaptive mindset. It initially be used for industry and for urban irrigation, but built in a way that's adaptable, that ultimately we can use of indirect or even ultimately direct potable reuse as we evolve our adaptive pathway. And there's one piece of research that came out of that, and it's linked here through the WASA Water Services Association link, is a piece of work that the industry collectively did called All Options on the Table. And it's something I'd commend to you to have a look. And it rings so true from your challenges, Enrico, in terms of distribution and moving water around, and your journey, Nancy, towards 100% utilisation when the regulation allows DPR and the path there. The industry got together and analysed the different approaches from an economic perspective, which goes to maintaining affordability. I'll just share with you some of the outcomes of that. And one huge takeaway for me, which is really important for recycled water. If we base our sort of baseline at surface water or groundwater, we worked out at about $1.10 to $1.20 Australian per cubic metre delivered. The first real lesson, and it's one that I did here from Los Angeles, is water efficiency measures cost us about 41 cents, less than half. If we haven't done the water efficiency, if we haven't addressed those leaks, Fred, that you mentioned at the very start of the program, we're not necessarily being the most economic and actually looking at affordability in the best way. We moved in the other direction, and seawater desalination, which we've already got, came in at about $2.74. It's a bit expensive, and we live, everything goes once through the city to the sea. We have to pump it back up the hill, and the pumping is a big part of that cost. We looked at stormwater capture and treatment, $3.29. Small stormwater tanks, even worse, $10 for small stormwater capture and recycling systems. Recycling water for industrial uses, because we need to build a second network, $4.35 in that work. And the one that really shifted the thinking for keeping options on the table and being adaptive until those regulations come through was what we call potable recycled water for drinking. Australians are usually pretty straight talking. What we found was new water or pure water. People said, just tell me what it is. I know it's recycled sewage, be honest with me. So potable recycled water for drinking, as plain as you can get, came in at $2.34, less than desalination. And that's primarily because of that opportunity to leverage existing infrastructure and not have to build new infrastructure. Right. So Sydney's in the middle of making those decisions. We're building the Upper South Creek project, which is the first major recycled water project, looking at serving Western Sydney and then potentially moving on to higher level uses while we assess a bunch of different options. We've done the planning for new desal plants. We've done the planning for the next recycled water opportunities throughout the city, particularly in the east of the city where there's socioeconomic advantage, not necessarily having only the people of Western Sydney drinking recycled water. So that adaptive approach is something that we're adopting and learning from, and it's wonderful to share and listen and hear the examples of similar approaches from around the world. I think my time's up, Fred.
Well, thank you, Rod. We'll come back to you in a minute or two. We are now going to someone I purposely scheduled at the last of this discussion, charming Evelyn, who is the chair of the water committee for the Sierra Club of California. And I did it on the end because I think environmental justice is the subject we want to talk about and how that impacts everyone that's on this panel. And I thought maybe Evelyn, Charming could perhaps tell us what it is and why it's important and her work on it. And I should say, Charming has a great deal of experience in the world of water, and especially working with all the variety of stakeholders involved in setting policy and doing this stuff. So welcome, Charming.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me, and thank you to the rest of the panelists. So I am with Sierra Club. Sierra Club is the oldest and largest environmental organization in the US, and we started in 1892. So we are over 135 years old. So we've been around for a very long time. And of course, the motto for Sierra Club is to enjoy, explore, and protect. And I think that says it all in what we do. As chair of the water committee, we do look at water issues all over the state. And I also chair the water committee for the Angeles chapter, which covers LA and Orange County. And I'm the vice chair of the Environmental and Social Justice Committee. Now, when we take a look at environmental justice or environmental and social justice, we always say there is no environmental justice without social justice. And exactly what does that mean? That means there are lots of ways that people are impacted by projects and by things that are happening in their neighborhoods. And all of our panelists here mentioned something that had to do with environmental justice today, whether it was the price of water, whether we're using nature-based solutions, whether we're building big projects, All of those things matter, and we have to take into account who are we affecting and how does it affect the environment. And when we say the environment, we're not just talking about people, we're also talking about animals and, marine life and the rivers, because all of these things play a role and they are all interconnected. And so, what does EJ look like when it comes to water? And water and EJ are very, very, very interconnected. And so I will take something that's happening in Los Angeles right now. Let's take a look at homelessness. How many of us ever think that the homeless people that are living on the street, or the unhoused people living on the street, what about their access to water? They typically do not have access to water. So where do they go for them to meet their water needs or their sanitary needs? So that is an EJ issue, and that is something that we do look at within the confines of the Water Committee and the Environmental and Social Justice Committee. And so that's just some food for thought, that it's not just being unhoused and living in a tent, but it's also access to water for food, access to water for bathing, access to water for sanitary needs. So that's also an issue. Now, when it comes to the public at large, what does EJ look like? So Nancy spoke about the projects being built by LADWP and by MWD, Metropolitan Water District, and LA Department of Water and Power. Ravi spoke about what they're doing, Enrico and Rod. Here in California, before you build a project, you're supposed to have public meetings with the neighborhood, with everyone involved. What occurs at those public meetings? Well, first of all, these meetings are always scheduled when people are at work. That is a huge issue. How can you expect to educate the public if they are not present? That means if you are going to hold a meeting, you should be keeping it in the evening or on a weekend. And if you keep it in the evening, remember, most of the time where these projects are being built are typically in underserved and under-resourced areas. That means if you're going to have a meeting, that meeting should be in the evening, and you should actually provide childcare, because these folks are working 2 or 3 jobs for them to make ends meet. Also, are these notices in different languages? I live in LA, there's like about 16, 17 different languages. Typically, public notice meetings are only in English. Again, how are we reaching our neighbors? How are we reaching the public? And that also becomes a huge issue later on, because typically by the time a member of the public knows something is going to be built in their neighborhood, it's too late for them to take any action. And of course, if they have to leave work, take a day off from work, most of them are hourly paid. So that means they are losing income for them to attend a meeting for a project that is supposed to benefit them in the long run, but yet they cannot afford to actually take the time for them to learn about that project. Another issue is the time frame that is given for members of the public to submit public comment. So, you have your public meetings, then, the industry, they will put out a notice of preparation, which we refer to as an NOP or scoping comments, and they will give maybe only a 30-day notice. I am in the industry, and I can assure you most of the times I don't even get the notice on time. So one of the first things we do is actually ask for an extension, because we know, at least, we have professionals who can actually comment on these notices, but most of the public do not, and they never receive those notices. So that also becomes an issue. Then let's talk about earthquake resilience. We heard a lot of talk about resilience here. In California, we are subject to earthquakes, and most of the world right now, places that never had earthquakes, now have earthquakes. The Caribbean now has hail. So we know climate change is happening, and it's happening much faster than we expect it to. What does earthquake resilience look like? Who is impacted? When we have an earthquake, who loses access to water? Who can afford to lose access to water? And again, these are all issues we have to take into consideration. So here in Los Angeles, the ordinance says that you are allowed to put in 2 water barrels, which hold like 50 gallons of water. Really and truly, that is not enough if you want to capture stormwater. These 2 barrels will be filled with the first rain, with less than 1 inch of rain. These 2 water barrels will be filled. So this is something we have to take into consideration. If someone has a private home, shouldn't we be saying, let us give them rebates so that they could have a larger cistern to collect that water, and that there should be a minimum of at least 4 water barrels per house, per single family home? So these are all things we need to take into consideration. And we do a good job here in LA of stormwater capture and recycling water and, replenishing our aquifers. We do not have the same problems that the Central Valley has in Central California, or, where there is land subsidence because of overpumping. And again, all of these become issues within the EJ space. And let's talk about water quality. Typically, the folks that are most injured with poor water quality, again, happen to live in under-sourced, under-resourced areas. Why is that? Because most of the times they have a very small water utility, and that small water utility does not want to raise the rates because maybe they're only servicing 300 people or 1,000 people. They don't want to raise the rates. What that means is that they do not have the technical staff to actually overlook their system. That becomes an environmental and social justice issue. And this is where I always feel that our bigger water agencies actually need to step in and maybe share resources. Because again, the folks that are impacted are your brown and Black people, our lower income people in these particular areas. And, and like, again, Fred, you mentioned Flint, Michigan, a perfect example. So these things do occur, and they occur all the time. And, we don't talk about this much, but I always say none of us actually know the true price of water. What we do is we pay for the infrastructure. We pay for the water to get to us. And then that brings you to who benefits and who pays. So in terms of who benefits and who pays, when you look at the ratepayer, we always advise water agencies to have a tiered water system. That means those who use less pay less. Those who use more should pay substantially more because they can afford it. They don't really care about their water footprint. However, the person who's making $15 an hour, $10 an hour, they will automatically be conserving already because it affects their pockets. And so this is something when we're talking about big projects, big infrastructure, we actually have to take the time for us to consider, where are the impacts? Who is this impacting? And last but not least, I will mention nature-based systems. These, of course, we truly believe in because these help mitigate lots of factors like the heat island effect that Rod mentioned. When you incorporate nature-based systems in neighborhoods that do not have enough trees, and you say, okay, we need to build a tree canopy, or we need to put in a park, and within that park, we can actually, save water. We can save our stormwater through that park. We can reuse it, whether it's to water the turf. So, the kids can play soccer or football if you're in Europe. So the kids can play football / soccer, reusing water in cemeteries and, golf courses, using recycled water. So all of these things matter. And yes, it is not one approach. It's all of the approaches, but it is really important to think about these things. And in terms of, the projects, whether it is recycled water with the brine being distributed in the ocean, or whether you have an ocean desalination plant, it's very important for us to remember that there are side effects, and we do have to mitigate these effects on the ocean, on marine life, and to mammals. And we cannot over-allocate our rivers and our other water sources, because again, there are side effects. Nature also depends on these water sources.
You know, it seems to me that, and by the way, anybody who's listening who has questions, please jot them down in the chat. It seems to me, Charming, that first of all, the subject of climate change, while it's not new to the people in this panel, it's gradually being, recognized throughout the world. What about, in environmental justice? Are you seeing any increased understanding of the importance of environmental justice?
I would absolutely say yes, particularly here in the US. But even within the panelists, they may not call it environmental justice, but I can hear it when they speak, and I know that there is an issue. So, I would say, in 2001, Sierra Club made an about turn, and we said we have to look at every issue through the lens of environmental justice. And
that was a big change, wasn't it?
Yes, it's a big change.
Yeah,
And it's exactly, even though we want to promote and say we are pro-environment, we were overlooking the people that are most affected. And we had to change the way we looked at things, because people also matter. It's not just the environment affects everyone. Bad air quality affects everyone. Bad water quality makes people sick. So we actually changed the way we looked at issues, and that became a focal point. And I think, wherever you go in the world, you are seeing it more. They might not have the term for it. They may not call it environmental and social justice, but I think it is present no matter where you are and no matter where you live.
So as we get closer to our ending of this, there's a couple of things I want to this is for Nancy and Enrico, and probably Ravi as well, but is there a role for decentralized kinds of approaches, even in large metropolitan areas like LA or in northern Italy? So do you see there's some kind of a ability to accept that or to use that, or is that just not the way to handle the kind of challenges that metropolitan areas have?
Well, I think as Charming noted, there are a lot of water agencies in California of varying sizes. So Los Angeles being very large, and some that really serve very small numbers of people. So those are in some sense decentralized. I mean, I think at least the experience, I think, for the city of Los Angeles is that to do things, treatment at a decentralized scale is just prohibitively expensive.
Interesting.
Things like capturing stormwater can be done at a very decentralized in a very decentralized scale, from everything from the rain barrels that Charming mentioned to sort of neighborhood level projects to sort of regional projects at regional scale. So, in some places, maybe the technology will change. Will get more cost effective to do things at decentralized scales. But there's still plenty of places in California where people are on septic systems. Those are very decentralized, and they often have the problem that they're hard to maintain. They leak and don't provide the level of treatment that you can get out of a wastewater system.
Enrico?
I was saying almost the same thing. The point is that some infrastructure need economy of scale. So if you want to reduce the cost of some treatment, you need big plants, but not for everything, let me say. What is becoming more decentralized is the interaction with the users and the citizen can help to collect water. No? That is something that is a change of mindset, but let me say it's just going back to how everybody was dealing with water in the past, no? Okay, because now we have centralized all the plants in which water is something only a matter of open a tap and paying a tariff, no? At least in Italy, we are not incentivized to collect water, rainwater, for example. We are not incentivized to reuse the water, so we are not asked to offer the acquisition of water. No, so all this kind of model are decentralization of the water model. That is something that is coming now. No, so I wouldn't say that we want to have small plants because it's inefficient, but we need more cooperation. Let me say.
Interesting.
I'm going to slightly differ from both of you, Nancy and Enrico, because what happens, India has metro cities of, say, this national capital region is 40 million people. The colony I'm living in is 1,000 homes, almost 4,000 people. So the policies in India require any new colony to have sewage treatment plant with specified output quality, with a certain grey water recycling loop for the entire 30-acre area. And that greening is done by that water. The flushing water in the newer systems are recycled waters. So what happens, the cost of taking the sewage to a centralized plant and then pumping it back to the user is so much more, rather than if we do the recycle of the grey water, at least to some extent, our water consumption comes down. And this is then dependent, and the cost is borne by the households who are living there. So it does not get transferred to the utility, who have to then manage it. And each decentralized system has to have a BOD, COD, and a sensor, which sends in the data back to the authorities, and they have then the permission to discharge it in the public utility discharge mains.
So as I want to talk about a subject we haven't touched a lot on, and of course the name of our organization is the Network for Global Innovation. You know, my background is technology and entrepreneurship, and so what I'd like to talk about is where do we think the most innovation is needed in the water resiliency challenges? And that's open to anyone in the panel who wants to jump in. Rod, I guess you're first.
I would, because I'd like to make a link, if I could, with that and the last conversation.
Sure.
Just to wind back a bit to make the point, I think, to jump to innovation, I think decentralized systems get a lot of bad press and misunderstanding. I'd like to advocate for the idea that it's the idea of decentralizing, whether it's 3 major recycled water plants for the whole of Sydney, or whether it's at a household scale or a precinct scale, as decided by Ravi. I think that is incredibly fertile ground for innovation. It's got constraints around it in terms of existing infrastructure. If you've already got a central system, it's expensive. If you're averting a central system, it can be cost effective. But I think one of the important elements that we forget in that, particularly if we go to cost, is the increase in resiliency that comes from distributed systems. The self-healing, the individual backup, the many failure points, which means a failure doesn't compromise an entire suburb or an entire city, and others around have supporting systems so you can get self-healing. So I think there's huge opportunity in that kind of innovation, but I'd like to take that a little bit further. It's not about pipes and pumps and treatment plants. It's actually about the lived experience of the people who are experiencing water and waste sanitation services through the system, and rethinking and innovating. I think Charming's nodding here. Innovating and being innovative about the thought of the experience of the individuals and how they might interact, engage with, and participate in the delivery of service differently. which evokes different ways of thinking of engineering of assets down the line when you have the opportunity, obviously not in all cases. So I think there's huge fertile ground for innovation and rethinking from a human-centric perspective, the way we deliver resilient, sustainable services. And I think that evokes many hours of interesting conversations about in which circumstances, which different ways of thinking can work instead of a one-size-fits-all, which is great. We need that safety net, but there's ways to be more efficient, more sustainable, deliver greater social justice through innovative distributed thinking. That's my suggestion.
Enrico.
Yeah, I agree. Really, it's a matter of innovation and again business models. But maybe let me say it depends a lot from which situation you start. Because I come from a country in which the development of new village and towns was ended maybe 1,000 years ago, and so it's a matter. We already have a lot of infrastructure for the sewage. It is not always the same. Some of course, some houses are not connected to the sewage network, but for sure, I'm leaving the same question on the electricity market. So is better a smart grid, microgrid, or is better a bigger interconnection? So talking with people from Australia, they are for smart grid, of course. Okay, and they are right. In Italy there aren't small grid because we have all the towns already connected. So it's a matter of trade-off of cost, infrastructure, and
Localization, right?
Yeah, localization.
Charming, you wanted to you raised your hand. Was that to say hello, or did you want to say something?
No, I wanted to say something because you asked about innovation. And because I work on so much, sometimes trying to defeat ocean desalination projects, I would say definitely in terms of how do we mitigate for the brine and, the ocean discharge, even now with our sewage plants, we're getting lots of problems now with the discharge from the sewage plants on the chemistry side. So that I would like to see some innovation there. Blue carbon capture projects, again, for mitigation. And big ag, when we look at agriculture uses, about 80% of our water here in California. And sometimes, like if you look at the Imperial Valley, where the soil is actually very saline, they are still flushing that soil with loads and loads of potable water. So, can we see, I would love to see some innovation there where we can do something with the saline salt, where we don't have to use fresh water from an over-allocated Colorado River, which is imperiled as it is, and we're just using that water to flush salt off the soil. So that's my input.
Great. Ravi?
Yeah, my only final point is a lot of frugal innovations will come from India for two reasons. One, we cannot afford expensive.
What do you mean by frugal innovation, first of all? Okay.
What happens is people are poor. They cannot pay for very expensive solutions. So whatever we do has to be very, very competitive, very low cost, yet very sustainable. Because people don't pay for operating costs. They're poor. They cannot pay for very high capex. They're poor. And hence, the innovations are extremely frugal, not only in installing, but running. For example, our automatic chlorination and monitoring. Less than $10,000 can look after, say, 2,000 people. So these are the issues that we have to take care of.
Interesting. Okay, we're nearing the end of our allotted time. I'm going to give each of you a chance to say something that you've wanted to say, but I haven't allowed you to do that yet. You're also the panelists are going to be glad to know that NGIN is having technical difficulties and we can't seem to get our breakout sessions to work. So you're not going to have to stick around for that. This is the world of innovation. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. Starting with you, Rod, what would you like to say that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
I think, thank you. I've had a chance to say most things. The two messages, I guess, I'd like to finish with this is reconfirming that water is local. So there are no fixed solutions. What works best for distributed systems in Northern Italy is very different to what works in Sydney or in India. But I think the key for us as water professionals is to admit that we don't have all the answers and to work with communities and manage that uncertainty, to acknowledge that we can't predict climate change, to also acknowledge it's probably going to get a whole lot worse than we expect at the moment, or to at least to be prepared for that eventuality, and to be adaptive and consultative and innovative in our approaches. I think that's at least advice for how to collaborate going forward.
Ravi?
As an NGO, it would be amiss if I don't ask for funds or support. And
right.
if not for that, reach out to us for any technical assistance if you like our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Charming. You're still mute. There we go.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. What would I like to say? Well, I would like to hope everyone got, a good idea about EJ and how to incorporate it. And Rod said it best, consult with everyone, the public, before you put in a project. And I just want to say to everyone, everyone forgets about water. All we hear about is let's go beyond coal, beyond fossil fuels. Let's electrify our grid. Guess what, folks? We cannot live without water. And let us keep water in our thoughts, that when we're saying let us electrify, we need water to generate that electricity. And, we need that electricity to pump that, will get that water to where it's going. So let us not leave water out of the conversation.
Excellent. Enrico.
Yeah, Fred, sorry, I lost the question, but I could guess from the answer of the other question. But if you can,
if there's anything else you want to say.
Okay, it was a very simple question. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I want just to say one thing. We talk about a lot about reuse of water and treatment. We haven't talked about something that is very, very crucial for us, is the leakages, aqueduct leakages, in which we are investing a lot in terms of new procedures, new techniques. And I think that a lot of cooperation among utility could come from sharing techniques. No, there is the International Water Association with, of course, all the procedures, but different kind of aqueduct need a different solution. No, and so I think that one of the best things to do in order to deal with the water problem, let me say, is for sure do not waste water. No, and unfortunately, is a big problem for almost all the aqueduct. No. So it depends on the average. We have situation. The average of Italy is quite a poor average, because it's something like 35% of leakages, of maybe 40%. No, quite a lot. Wow. We have situation in which we have a 15%, because we manage it very well with DMAs and a lot of techniques, satellite and other tools, but the IREN average is 30%. So we have some situation in which the leakages are above 50%. Also, but it's just a matter of investment and techniques that can be developed soon, very, very fast.
Great. Well, Nancy, I think you get the last word. All right.
No, thanks. I think I just kind of go back to the topic around water resilience, and I think it goes for any of our infrastructure. They're pretty good at doing planning, but what are we planning for? And I think particularly when it comes to water, we have to plan for a future that looks very different than today. And changes, in climate, growth in population, in many areas facing both water scarcity and lack of investment in our water infrastructure. So, I think defining and developing really best practices around what does water resilience look like is going to be important, I think, for people all around the world.
Well said. I want to end by saying what Charmy said. Don't forget about water. That's a very important thing. So I want to thank our panelists, Rod and Ravi and Charmine and Enrico and Nancy for, I think, a very, very interesting discussion. Certainly a wide perspective of situations and challenges. Thank you for spending time with us today. For those who are viewing this, we are going to put contact information up shortly. We are recording this, and most often people see our discussions via recording because of the time zone. So look out for our social media notifications so that you can look it through the whole recording. I want to thank you very, very much. It's been fascinating, and I just have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
you. Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.